You mentioned there were some things in the competitive world that you weren't necessarily comfortable with.
There was this horse who very clearly had bloody welts on its side. Also happened to be the horse that was winning every single class we were in.
I went and found the most dangerous, probably meaning most at risk also.
One that was an Appalachian Brumby. He was the most feral horse either of us had ever met. He was going to kill himself.
You went from a world where people want total control to where like we have no control. The horses can choose to do whatever they would like to do.
Through just slowly building and understanding, I found that the more that we let go, the more that it forces us to really listen to where a horse is at.
Is every horse able to build a relationship with a human that can be healthy for both parties?
All horses can have a relationship, just sometimes it's a little different than what we might originally plan for.
There are healers on this planet with the power to soften the suffering of mankind, yet they have remained in the recesses of the world, abused, discarded, and labeled as trash. This is The Touch of a Mustang. I am your host, Shalise Clough, and I'm here to tell the story of wild horses, Mustangs, and the humans who are discovering and sharing their gifts while working to protect their well-being and preserve their spirit, so this divine power won't be lost. Join us on this quest with the Wild Mustang.
Avery, thanks so much for being here on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
To start with, can you tell everybody that's listening a little bit more about you and who you are and what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name's Avery Sullivan. I have been kind of with horses since before I can remember. The typical little crazy horse girl taking lessons every time she could. And then slowly over the years has developed into now also, my work and career as well, which was not what I anticipated when I first started with horses. So the biggest things that I do is my husband, Patrick, is also very involved in horses. And so we met about 6 years ago and now do kind of some cool things with our nonprofit and our Liberty organization. So very passionate about liberty, horsemanship, bridleless riding, and also rescue horses. So those are really the biggest things that we focus on. And one of the avenues we do that is through our nonprofit called Gamilah Unbridled. And that started with actually him doing a ride across the country from California to Kentucky completely bridleless on his two Arabian horses. And throughout that whole trip, the biggest, I think, most exciting part was stopping at a lot of different nonprofits, which were both rescues and, different organizations working with veterans, with youth, with you name it, we kind of had a little bit of everything. And I was able to be on for a portion of that trip as the driver. So that's how it all kind of started. And through that, the trip ended, and we both felt like there's this huge missing piece in the horse industry, especially with nonprofits, with rescues, with Mustangs as well, with a lack of education. And so that really led us to dive into the next couple projects that we had. One of them was called the Rescue Project. And through that, we took in 7 of the toughest rescues that we could find around the country. Really wide array. Some were totally feral. Some were not feral, but had been dangerous. They were from kill pens. So really diverse group of horses. And we took them in and spent 4 months working with them just at Liberty. And the goal was to show that when you give these horses the choice, the freedom to choose, and you try and meet them where they're at and educate them that way, that it's a really powerful way to help them transform and let go of some of the baggage that they may have. And so that was just a really, you know, incredible experience that we learned a lot from. And all the horses through that ended up being adopted, or a couple of them we ended up keeping, which then kind of led to where we are now, where we've continued to progress with these horses. And we now have a Liberty team that are all rescue horses that work together. And we travel to different places, still work a lot with nonprofits on education and trying to use these horses to show just how amazing they can be if they're given kind of that freedom. So that's really, I think, the biggest stuff that we've done over the past couple of years that people are familiar with. We also recently started a Liberty organization, which is called Equine Liberty Organization, and that is dedicated to helping people participate in Liberty with their horses. And so we have shows, both virtual, in-person, academies, and kind of different learning events. And it's really designed to help give people a place, to go, to do Liberty, to progress with their horses, and not just, you learn it and then there's not really anywhere to go with it. So those are really the two things that I'm super passionate about. Yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah. And let's back up a little bit. So you started pretty young riding horses, and it sounded like that was more competitive when you started.
Yeah, so I started riding when I was 6 at a traditional lesson barn where, you would go and your horse was kind of tied up and maybe you were lucky you got to tack them up, but it was very much focused on getting on your horse and, trotting around and learning how to ride. I kind of got into 4-H and did 4-H for my whole childhood, and that involved a lot of competitions. I ended up getting my first horse and boarding at a barn that did the quarter horse circuit shows. So it was a lot of competing, and that was a blessing and a curse. I think it taught me a lot, but I always kind of struggled in the traditional competition world because I either A, didn't have the right horse for it, or B, wasn't willing to do the things that the trainers told me I needed to do to be able to be competitive. So that kind of led me, after I graduated high school, to step back and focus more on just enjoying my horses. And that's why I never intended for them to really become such a big part of my career as they have. And through that kind of stepping back, I changed directions a little bit and got my first Mustang through the Extreme Mustang Makeover. It was the youth.
Nice. Love to hear about the Mustangs.
Yeah, so she really helped change that trajectory for me, because it was either I was gonna, get a horse that would be a better fit for doing the shows that I was used to doing, or going a totally different path. Well, they clearly did really good with their mailings because they mailed it right to my house and directed it to me and said, "Hey, you should apply to do this Mustang makeover." And as a, little 16, 17-year-old, I was like, "That's perfect. It's so
Yeah.
exciting. I want to start a Mustang." And so through her doing that competition, it really shifted, because then I had, this little yearling Mustang that I had to figure out how to start and train and, keep to learn more about the natural horsemanship and then Liberty and kind of my path here today.
What were some of the things that pushed you in that direction? You kind of mentioned even before there were some things in the competitive world that you weren't necessarily comfortable with. How did that end up solidifying that you really did want to learn a different way with horses?
Yeah, that's a great question. Really, there were so many little things that, when I think back of my experiences growing up with horses, I did not have the luxury of having these fancy, well-bred horses that could just go into the show pens and do well. And a lot of my friends did. And at the time, it was just frustrating, as a kid's perspective, because I really didn't understand it. But there was another piece of it where I was seeing, what these people were having to do, how they were having to ride, that they were needing bigger bits, bigger spurs, put a tie down on, do this, do that, lunge your horse for 2 hours, all of these things that just didn't feel right to me. And I just really finally hit this point after going to a show when it was just before I ended up doing the makeover. And I went to the show, and I remember there was this horse who very clearly had bloody welts on its side. And I was devastated. I thought it was, horrible. How could that be happening? And it also happened to be the horse that was winning every single class we were in.
Mm.
And, they just would spray paint over the welts and go in the class. And
Aw.
yeah, it was just so disheartening. And we actually ended up reporting it, and nothing really came of it, right? Because she was the
Yeah.
one winning and paying the money to do the entry fees. And so I think that was a big turning point of like, okay, if this is what it's going to be, I don't want to do it. I'm a very competitive person. I love having goals. I love having things to work towards. And I think it's important for us as people to have those things, but not at the expense of our horses. And so that really was the final straw for me. It helped me see, okay, we're going to just try something different. And, maybe that'll end up finding a different way to compete, or maybe it will just end up working with horses in a different way. But that really, the accumulation of all those things helped me hit a point where I was like, it's time to try something different.
And it was pretty soon after that you ended up with Mustangs, doing the Mustang makeover. What was
It
that
was,
experience like?
yeah, it was probably like maybe a year after, maybe a couple, but yeah, so I I really it's funny, like, I was so, excited about this and, like, wanted to be as prepared as possible, so I was actually at the point where I was saving up to get my first car, and on the application, it says, you know, you need 6-foot round pen panels, and we had round pen panels, but they were 5 foot, and I am, like, a type A rule follower, and I have since learned that many people just kinda don't have 6-foot round pen panels,
Yeah.
but I did not
There's some
think that
interesting
way.
ways. Yeah.
Yep, there are. And so I was like, okay, well, you know what? I'm just gonna wait and I won't get a car right now. I'm gonna use the money I've saved to get a 6-foot round pen panels. And so I get those panels and we drive all the way out to Illinois, which we're from Maine. I'm from Maine, living there now. So it's a very far drive.
Wow.
I get out there and it was a torrential downpour, just a dreary day. It was really gross out and went to look at the pen and got my number. And so I went and looked, and that horse that I saw was actually clearly had some sort of lameness. And so my very first initial thought was like, oh, this is not going to work, right? I can't take home a
Yeah.
horse that's clearly lame. It had horses with lameness issues in the past. So I was started off pretty devastated. And then I go in and they say, oh, don't worry, we'll have an alternate that, you know, we can give you. And so they give me the alternate number and I go out and it is the smallest little yearling in the entire pen. And so we get her loaded up, we drive her home, and it's still a joke now. We unload her into those 6-foot panels and oh my God, it was like a big
Thank
year.
goodness you got them and spent your money for a yearling, right?
Exactly. I mean, she was the tiniest little thing. I probably could have pushed her over myself, but you know, we did it and it was worth it. And, you know, her size made her look like she was just, you know, going to be a piece of cake, but she actually is one of the most opinionated, long-willed, smartest little horses I have ever worked with. And she taught me so much over, you know, first those 90, 100 days, and then I still have her today. So over the
Aw.
many years afterwards, she really has taught me a lot. It's very interesting because, you know, there are horses that are feral that we work with that are not Mustangs. But I think the Mustangs, there's just something different about them in that, you know, they were bred to survive and they are so innately smart and so in tune with their natural instincts in a way that we as people don't normally have to, you know, work with. And so
Yeah.
I learned so much through that experience. And she also helped me find some more skills that I needed to work on in my horsemanship. So it led me to get more help from other people and really bring me to the path where I am today.
Nice. And then soon after that, you started in Liberty, or when did the Liberty come into your story?
So the Liberty came a couple years after that. I finished the makeover and you know, the youth keep their horses at that time. So I kept her and was then had moved my horses home. We for the first time ever, my family lived in a place where for the first time ever we were able to bring our horses home. And so at the time I had 3 horses that were at home and my mom and I would ride and just kind of for fun. And it was really kind of a break in my horsemanship in that there was nothing competitive. I had no big goals. I was just enjoying my horses, trail riding, riding in the field. And it was wonderful and probably would have continued that way. But probably about 2 or so years after that, I got convinced to do a Liberty clinic with Dan James of Double Dan Horsemanship. And I was pretty burnt out on clinics at that point because, as mentioned before, I had gone to a lot of experiences where it was just go somewhere and feel pretty disheartened by the way they were approaching things, or to hear that my horse isn't going to be able to do it anyway. So, you know, I wasn't really looking to continue to, you know, learn at that point in a clinic setting. But the barn that I used to board at, she convinced me to go. And I went there and spent 3 days learning about Liberty and instantly hooked. I thought it was so cool. It was so amazing. And all it was that my horse was following me a couple steps. It was no big fancy things that we see now or that we're working on now. It was just simply I can let my horse go and they want to be with me and they are choosing to connect with me. And that was really just such an eye-opening experience. I've done, you know, natural horsemanship, learned a lot about groundwork and kind of approaching things a little bit differently over the years through that. And I'd really enjoyed that. And it helped shift me away from that kind of show training viewpoints, but this was like the next level. And after doing that, just went back to that was in the fall. I went and kind of played with it with my horses over the winter, and then ended up getting invited out to intern that next spring at Dance Farm in Kentucky. And so I had just graduated college, and so I was like, okay, well, this is a good time to go and do it. And so I drove down to Kentucky with my horse Leo for the month and spent that month learning and, progressing more. And I just was continuing to just love Liberty. I learned a lot of other things there too, but that was really what stuck with me. But after the month, I went home and I still was planning, okay, let me start my full-time job and have my horses be for fun. And then that next spring, Dan and his wife actually called and they said, hey, we need some extra help for this, training program that we're having. And we were just wondering if you want to come down for another month. And I was like, okay,
Like job horses. I don't know.
probably shouldn't. It was COVID. So I was like, things are quieter, and I was working
Mm-hmm.
remotely. So that definitely, I think, helped to convince me
Yeah.
to do it. And so I went down, and instead of a month, I ended up being there for a year and a half and, becoming the assistant trainer there, meeting my husband there. And that really led me to then the next thing was going on the cross country trip.
Yeah. Neat. And tell us about that trip. I remember seeing Patrick doing that with wasn't it a little black Arabian? I
Yes.
feel like I saw that one a lot. Yeah. I have a special place in my heart for Arabians also. That's what I grew up with. So Mustangs and Arabians, all the horses, everybody's like, stay away from. Those are my horses.
I love it. Yeah, we are the same way. Yeah, that trip was in 2021, and yes, it was on his little Black Arabian Gammy and her brother Hal. So he took those two horses so they could alternate. And I remember, so we, met in Kentucky there, and he kind of told me about the trip, and we had kind of just started dating when he was really planning it and getting ready to go that April, and it was that fall before, and I was like, okay, this seems like a really ambitious, thing
Yeah.
to do, but
It's
I'm
a little
gonna
crazy.
a little crazy, you seem really determined, and people that don't know Patrick don't realize he is type B all the way. So he is not a planner. And I can't even tell you the way he just went into that trip with half the things like it'll all work out. I mean, they didn't even have a truck and trailer until like a week before they left. It was
Wow.
it was a lot of kind of chaos leading up to it and thinking a little bit in the back of my mind, like, is this really gonna happen? Are you gonna be able
Yeah.
to make it? And he did, he made it happen and he and his sister Nettie started the trip, but she was actually pregnant when she started it.
Boy.
She could only go so long and she went until like 8 months pregnant. I mean, she was
Wow.
committed.
That's amazing.
Amazing. She's an amazing person. But when she had to kind of tap out there, that's when I came and finished up the trip. And it was such a cool experience. And I didn't, I had a couple days where I rode, when we had some extra help, but most days I was just navigating and driving the trailer and, helping when we went to the different nonprofits to teach and introduce people to the horses. And it was really amazing to see the horses and the way that through that ride, they just became the most amazing partners. And you could literally see, like, Gammy learned to look both ways across the street before
Yeah.
she crossed it. It's just they're such
I
intelligent
believe
animals.
it. Mm-hmm.
And when we give them the opportunity to think and to, make their own choices within these boundaries, it's just, amazing the confidence that both those horses developed in themselves, in their partnership. It was just really beautiful to see. And, stopping and teaching at these different places as well, we met so many different amazing people doing amazing work that we still are connected with today, which is another beautiful piece of that. I think it started a really cool community. Um, but the biggest thing for me was just seeing the horses handle that entire ride and just every single day, even when there was challenges, they were okay. They felt secure and, I don't think there was really a single time that he didn't feel confident and trusted with his horse, which I think is really a mind-blowing thing when you think about riding your horse.
Yeah.
The toughest parts of it were absolutely the cars. and not because of the horses, just because people don't always respect the horses or understand. So
Mhm.
that was really the scariest part. But the horses themselves, it was just really cool to see them understand and just take care of him the whole way.
Yeah, and I don't know if we mentioned it, but he did the whole thing bridleless, correct?
He did, yeah, he did, the whole thing with just a neck rope on. He did ride Hal, Gammy's brother, a couple days with the halter on and then the neck rope, just because he was quite green. He wasn't originally planning to have Hal as one of his ridden horses, but, he makes it happen. And so, yeah, he had a couple of days where he had the halter on to just help if Hal needed support. And it really, well, I think it was a couple rides, and he felt good about it and was able to take his halter off. And yeah, they made it the whole way with just the neck rope, and the horses responded to it just like if they had any other tack on.
Yeah, that's incredible. And you're like, here's this guy that doesn't plan. His sister's already 8 months pregnant. This is the family for me.
Yes, yeah. It's funny. Not if you had said that, back a few years ago, before I'd met him, this would be the situation I would be in. But it just worked out, and I'm definitely opposite in many ways. And that worked out well because we were able to
Yeah.
and still are able to complement each other. But I think we have the same values that help me deal with some of the craziness he likes to
Yeah.
create.
Yeah, makes for a good team. That's what you need. So after the trip, tell us a little bit about what happens, and especially with the rescues that you guys took on. You said you kind of went and found the most dangerous, probably meaning most at risk also,
Yes.
and how all that transpired.
Yeah, yeah, we did. Like I said, after the trip, one thing that really stuck out to us is there are so many amazing people across the country that run different rescues and sanctuaries and organizations that are dedicated to rescuing horses, whether it's from homes that can no longer care for them, from slaughter pipelines, from working with Mustangs that are in holding pens. And there's so many people doing that. And one of the biggest struggles that they have overall was finding education and training for these horses. And, that's the thing we're most passionate about is we love working with the horses and we love working with people. And so when we decided to do this project, we really wanted to prove a point that even the horses that you think like there's nothing left for them, that's not true. There is always something. And we ended up having an application process. And so they had to be a 501c3 nonprofit just to kind of help narrow it down a little bit, and make sure that we were supporting places that were really, legitimate and really trying to help as many horses as they could. We got these applications, and originally it was going to be 5 horses, but of course, how these things go. There were a couple extras that we just couldn't say no to, and so it ended up being 7. And it was a really cool variety. We had one that was an Appalachian Brumby. So that was the one that was wild. And I think it was Virginia or West Virginia mountains and was rounded up. He actually was a herd stallion. And he had a lot of similarities to kind of the Mustangs in
Hmm.
that he was completely feral. He was actually the most feral horse either of us had ever met. There was not a single person that could get within 20 feet of him when he
Wow.
came down to us. Like he was terrified. I've never seen that level of fear with a horse. And he was going to kill himself. Like he was going to climb out of a pen. It was really sad. There was not
Yeah.
an
Speaking of
ounce.
why you do need 6-foot panels.
Yes, he was the
Yeah.
example for sure. No aggression whatsoever, but so much fear that he would do anything to get away from you. So that was one of them. The other one, Nostalgia, who we still have today. She's an ex-bucking stock horse that was from the Medicine Horse Project out in Nevada, and she was actually so scared that she jumped out of her round pen into the desert and escaped for a week
This is
before.
when she was with you or before?
No, before
Before you
this was
guys.
yeah, this was her kind of what really drew us in is that she jumped out to escape. It's like, wow, that's a great fit.
The crows won't even hold her. Let's get that one.
Yes, yeah, I don't know how we'll keep her, but, yeah, so they had to recapture her just when she wanted water. That was kinda how terrified she was, and then we had, as well, a Mustang from Kansas, and he had actually kicked the farrier and broken their arm. So, some obviously comes from fear, but had some, willingness to be a little aggressive through that fear, and so that was one that we took in. He ended up being just the sweetest thing. He now works with kids, so it was
Aw.
totally, just feeling stuck in that situation that led him to act that way. And then anyway, I could go through them all, but those are kind of a little bit of an example of the type of horses that we had come in. So it was a wide variety from all kinds of different states, and they all, had some pretty serious issues. More than one of them was at the point where the rescue was like, if we can't figure out a way to safely care for them and get them, just the basic care that they need to keep them as a sanctuary horse, then we're probably going to have to look at, euthanizing just because we can't care for them.
Yeah.
So it was definitely horses that were, like you said, the most at risk for, not being able to be helped. And they all came down in January, and we started working with them.
Wow. And so what was that process like? Where do you even start with a horse that doesn't want you within 20 feet of it, you know?
Yeah, yeah, that was honestly kind of a question we had too. It was definitely the most extremes, and we don't have a facility of our own, so this was in Texas at Patrick's mom's place, and we had bought some different round pens, and it was just craziness. We had this space that wasn't covered or anything, and we had all these different pens built depending on if the horse, needed 6-foot panels, if it was, halterable but had aggression issues, whatever it is. We had all these kind of pens set up, and we would go through working them, and we broke it up where I had 3 horses that I was working with. Patrick had 3 that he was working with. And then we had an intern, Dustin, who was with us, and he was working with a horse as well. And so we would kind of go through the day, working the horses. And the biggest step, part 1, was just, can we get them to just look at us? Part 1. And then
Yeah.
so they would look at us, which with a couple of them was hard enough, right? They were ready to be out of there however they could be. But once we got that, then it was, okay, will you take 1 step towards us? Okay, will you take 2 steps towards us? Will you let us take 1 step towards you? And it was so small what we were looking for and asking of them. And it really helped, I think teach us so much, in that it was so different from a lot of the horses that we work with, because the tiniest little things meant so much to most of them. And so it was really starting with just, can we get you to connect and allow us in your space? And we didn't, we got them all to the point where they could be touched. They would do Liberty, circles, walk trotting around us before we would even try and put the halter on. Because we intentionally wanted them to allow the halter, put the halters on like in a shoot or anything, because we just wanted to really work through it. And so that was the biggest step for especially Armani, who was the Appalachian Brumby, and Nostalgia, who was the one from Nevada. Getting them halterable took, for Armani, it was 2 months, which, for perspective, Patrick did the Mustang makeover as an adult that year prior, and he was riding his Mustang within 3 days, right? So
Yeah.
usually, we're pretty efficient with getting the horses, relaxed with us. That's our number one goal. But these horses were so extreme that it took him 2 months for the halter. It took Nostalgia about a month. And once they were, accepting of that, that was really step 1. And then we were going through kind of the colt starting process of, can we introduce you to obstacles, the saddle, different things, all at Liberty. So everything that we did, they were free, and they had to choose to connect and do it. They had to choose to stand there and let us, put the saddle on. They had to choose to go over the obstacles. They had to choose to do all those things. And once we got through all those steps, then we would get to the point of like, okay, well, now we're ready to try riding them. But it was all, I think the majority of the time over those 4 months was spent really on the prep work for that. And then some of them were a little faster than others, obviously, and picked it up a little quicker. And then it was moving on to trying to ride. And all of the first rides were done bridleless. So we had one of us in the round pen doing Liberty with the horse, and then the other one was riding, just so the horse could just get used to the feel of someone without kind of putting the cue on. I didn't intend to do any of the first rides on my horses because I am not that brave, but
Yeah,
I ended up doing it on all of them. It was really because after spending all that time doing Liberty with them, connecting with them, building that relationship, I felt a different type of trust, even though they were still very green and very, had needed a lot more work in finding relaxation and learning. But it was really different because I knew at the point where we were choosing to get on, they had accepted it, and they had showed in every way that we could ask them, yes, I'm okay with this. Yes, I'm ready for it. And so that ended up, being a really cool because all the first rides actually went really smoothly. And the horses, for how tense they were as horses, were actually relaxed. They weren't bucking. They went through the rides, got forward and did a great job. And so that was really something I didn't know if it would work going into it. I was worried and not so sure that we would even be riding them. And it was just really cool to see them progress to that level. And then from there, it was just really working through stuff just as a normal cold start.
Talk to us a little bit about, you kind of talked about in the show world how when horses had a problem, you up and up control, which is pretty common. And then you went from like a world where people want total control to where like we have no control. The horses can choose to do whatever they would like to do. What is that process like and that difference in working with horses? Because a lot of people, I think, work with their horses out of fear that something's going to go wrong. They anticipate things going wrong rather than maybe building that partnership.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're 100% right. For me, it's very much been a process and still is a process. Like I mentioned, I am not this like innately brave, get on any horse, ride it
Yeah.
out.
It's not fun riding a
No,
horse that,
that isn't relaxed, that isn't connected. It's stressful. And I know there's some people that it doesn't bother them, but I am not that type of person. So it's kind of ironic that I enjoy riding in this way. My horses have so much control. But through just slowly building and understanding, I found that the more that we let go, the more that it forces us to really listen to where our horse is at. And, when I bring my horse out to ride now, I'll do Liberty with them first. And it's very clear, okay, you've got, a lot of feelings today that we need to work through. So we're going to work through them. And if that means that we don't get on, then that's fine because this was more important. 90% of the time I bring them out and they do a little Liberty and they're like, okay, I'm good to go. But I think being forced to really check in with your horse of where they're at, for me, it has helped gain more confidence with my horse and with the partnership. I actually ended up keeping Indigo, the little gray mare that was one of the ones I worked with through that project. And she was a horse that they thought was unrideable because every time they went to, saddle her up and get on her, she would buck and bolt away. And so for her, having the choice to communicate how she felt was so monumental that she's now, my main horse that I ride and work my other horses at Liberty on the team. She's, performed at expos and fairs and all these different places being ridden, and she's never had a bridle on, in her whole life. It's all been bridleless. And she has helped me so much because she's not an easy horse, but the Liberty approach was so important to her that it transformed the type of horse that she was. And the more that we work with people as well, it's very interesting because people will often come in and say, I'm not going to ride bridleless, or, okay, I'm going to ride bridles maybe, but I'm only going to walk, right? They come in with like, this is all I'm comfortable doing. And they end up leaving a clinic, having ridden their horse in the big arena, walk, trot, canter, having the most relaxed ride of their life. Because so often we have this inner fear or this inner tension that is there, even if we can't put our finger on it or we don't want to acknowledge it. It's in our bodies and our horses can
yeah,
feel
yeah,
it. I know I have it, right? And I still
yeah,
have it some days. And they feel it even stronger when it's connected to reins and a bit, right? Our hands are usually where it comes out, where that tension comes out. And when there's something to brace against and to pull on, we want to hold on to it really tight. And that creates tension everywhere else in our body. And then it's in our horse's body. And so it's been so interesting to see the more bridles that we teach and the more that we work with other people, that 99% of the time when we take that bridle off or we say, okay, let's drop the reins and let's just use the neck rope, the horses within 30 seconds are stretching their head and neck down. They're blowing out. They're actually moving slower with more cadence, with more relaxation in their gait than they were 30 seconds ago with that bit. And so, I always say I'm not against bits. I'm not against bridles at all. I don't think everyone in the world needs to ride bridleless. I just think it's such an incredible tool to show us the tension that we're sometimes holding, the holes that we have, and where our horse is at. And I think the more that we see those, the more that we feel those, the more that we're forced to acknowledge and work through them, the more that, for me, that fear and that worriedness goes away because I feel like we're below the surface now. We've connected on such a deeper level. We've had these tough conversations where we've worked through stuff that both of us were uncomfortable with, and now we're both coming into this relaxed.
Yeah. From your experience and seeing the difference with the way that you guys approach the horses versus probably the way they've been approached their entire rest of their life with humans, do you think is every horse able to build a relationship with a human that can be healthy for, both parties?
Yeah, that's another really good question. I think a short answer is yes. I think that every horse can build a relationship with a person. I think that sometimes we have to revisit what we want that relationship to be. And I think sometimes people go into working with a horse, their horse, and they want something very specific. And sometimes that's not what that horse wants, and it's not what's best for that horse. For example, Tess, my Mustang, she doesn't really like being ridden. She's never really liked it. I've done a lot of different types of riding with her, but I could just tell she just doesn't love it. And she's phenomenal at Liberty. She's so smart. She loves coming up and learning a trick. She'll do anything when she knows there might be a treat at the end. So that makes her very engaged and very happy. And it took me a while to kind of hit the point where I was like, I don't need to ride her, right? Like that's for me, not for her. She's just as happy. She's happier if I just focus on other things. But I think that's hard because, a lot of times what we want to do is what we kind of put on our horses as what they want to do too.
Yeah.
And sometimes, that's through competition and sometimes it's just through what we want to do at home. But I think that's one of the toughest part for people is to be willing to just step back and say, okay, what does my horse really enjoy? Where are they at? And, we have some horses that we've worked with that have been, horses that we've said we don't think they're good candidates for riding. And sometimes it's physical and sometimes it's mental. And, could they be ridden? Yes. But do they want to be? Do they need to be? Maybe not. And so I think that's a big piece. But I've yet to ever come across a horse, even the most scared ones we've ever met that haven't wanted to have a connection with a person, or once they've realized that that connection can be a place of safety, of relaxation, that they end up enjoying it. Who was the one who you couldn't get within 20 feet of, he now teaches kid lessons, bride lesson at Liberty.
It's amazing.
It's amazing. It's just so cool to see. And that's because he was able to come to it on his own terms. So that's kind of my roundabout answer of yes, I do think that all horses can have a relationship. Just sometimes it's a little different than what we might originally plan for.
Yeah, for sure. If someone has a horse where they're getting that resistance, things aren't going well, they're in that place of struggle, what are some of the first things you would suggest that they do with their horse?
Yeah. I think it can a little bit depend on the horse and person, but I think one of the biggest things for us is just stepping back and going back to square one. For us, that's just connecting at Liberty and just seeing where it leads. I think a lot of the times when we go back and we act like, okay, this is a horse we've never worked with before, or or even, if we have done all these things, if we go back and we go to step one and we just say, hey, can we connect on the ground? Can we go for a walk together? Can we go for a run together? Can we do these things? Often the holes will present themselves pretty quickly. Almost every time that we've had someone come to us with a issue that they're having under saddle, it's something that's also happening on the ground too. And I think the only real exception to that is when it's been a trained habit that was only done under saddle. Sometimes that does happen, but a lot of the times when it's an overarching issue, people notice it more under saddle because it's, much more obvious when we're on their back versus when we're just going through our daily care or handling them on the ground. But it's almost always there in some capacity. And I think that going back to the ground, going back to just connecting and asking our horses to work with us on the ground, if you pay attention, it will really show it and give you a good path forward is how we approach when we have a horse to work with. It's kind of step one of, yes, we want to ride, but first let's just see what this horse shows us on the ground. And we'll see bolting, we'll see rearing, we'll see bucking, right? All of that will come through braciness, not wanting to go forward, all these things that we feel under saddle. We almost always see them step one when we just say, hey, can you just move forward and connect? And they usually will show us right off the bat what it is that's stopping them from doing that.
So your little crew is all mares, is that correct? Tell me a little more about that because mares have a really bad rap in the horse world, and they're actually my favorite also. I'm like, my gelding, I'm like, oh, you're a little obnoxious, but my mares, I just love them. So, yeah, tell us about your little crew and how they ended up all being mares.
Yeah. Yeah, that's it's so true. I got when I was kind of first learning Liberty, one of the first tips was, well, if you're gonna have a team at Liberty, make sure that they're not mares. And like, oh,
Okay, so I'll get mares.
so I
That
kind of
is funny though. You hear that all the time. Don't get a mare. Don't get a mare.
yeah, we see it even when we have horses, people looking for a sale horse. Anything is fine, just not a mare. Any color, any height, any this, but not a mare. And it's so interesting because I love them as well. And to me, I think mares are so smart and they're so willing to share how they're feeling. And I
Yeah.
think a lot of the times people don't like what they have to say. But for me, I love that about them because I think it helps. I'm always wanting my horses to feel like they can communicate with me, to share how they're feeling with their body, with their ears, with whatever it is that they have to communicate. And I think the mares do that so well. They do it so subtly. And the geldings are kind of just, like you said, like goofy a lot of the times. And they're just kind of good for anyone. And they're just like, yeah, I'm just getting along. It's great for a lot of things. But I think that mares have this ability to, challenge us. And when we get through those challenges, they're just such incredible partners because to them, they need to know that you are there for them and that you are going to keep them safe and willing to, I think, step up and communicate with them. But once you give that, I mean, they're just the most incredible partners. So yeah, I did not intend to have my first Liberty team be three mares, but it just kind of worked out that way. And it started with Tess, my Mustang, who I had, gotten and did Liberty work with her. And then through the rescue project that we did, Indigo, my little gray mare, was the second one that I ended up adopting and keeping. And she was my most challenging horse, that I've worked with to date. It's funny because when I said that I was going to keep her, people were like, oh, you like fell in love with her. I was like, yes, but not in the way that you're thinking. Like, I just so admire her and the way that she pushes me to be better. And almost every session is a challenge with her, right? If I'm working on something new, if we're trying something different, she is going to hold me accountable. And I really love that about her and appreciate that. Some days do you want to just, plop around and think about it?
Not be
Yes.
challenged.
Yeah. For sure. And as our, relationship grows, we do have those days, innately she is that horse that is going to push me to be lighter, to be more aware, to acknowledge something that I might want to push past. And that's what I really loved about her. And I think a big part of that is that mare personality, that they're going to be much more inclined to do that. And I then, had Tess and Indigo and I was working them together and having a lot of fun with it. We had this other horse, Nostalgia, who was the ex-bucking stock horse who came from Nevada. And she was one that Patrick worked with to start. And he ended up riding her, but she was one of the ones where he was like, you know what, I don't think she wants to be ridden. And I don't think that she would be safe for the average person to ride, maybe ever. So let's not focus on that. Let's focus on what she's really good at because she is probably our best Liberty horse. I mean, she is so connected and
Wow.
she's so, so subtle in what she feels and does. And it's really amazing. And so we loved doing Liberty with her. And once we kind of decided that, we ended up shifting. And I was like, well, I'll work with her and do Liberty with her, as we prepare for the, trying to get her adopted. Because the second part of our rescue project was um, taking the horses that we still had and putting them into teams. So we had, we kind of talking about it and we ended up landing on the girls' team and the boys' team. So Patrick had the boys' team and he had four geldings, and two of them were ones that we had already owned, one rescue, and one was my gelding actually that he'd never worked with, and then two of the rescues. So he was working with them, and I ended up working with those three girls plus one other rescue who we had had come in. And I was working with them and we were preparing. We had some events that year, and one of them was going to do some demos at Equifest of Kansas. And so we had kind of hit the point where we were about a month away from going, and we weren't kind of sure yet who we were going to bring. And it just ended up that the three girls were more advanced than the boys at that point. They were a little more confident. So we're just like, you know what, let's bring them.
Go girls.
Like, yeah, that's really satisfying.
Yeah.
But so we decided to bring them, and we had some performances in their evening show. And I am to not being brave to hop on any horse. I am definitely not brave to going and performing in front of crowds. So it was a big step out of my comfort zone. And they were super green at that time. They'd only been working together in a team for maybe a couple months. So in hindsight, I'm like, wow, we really just jumped into that.
Yeah.
But it ended up working out really well, and they did a phenomenal job. And Nostalgia and Indigo actually performed a couple acts during the rodeo halftime show. So it was just really cool to kind of have that full circle moment and see this ex-bucking stock horse then come out and perform in a totally different way
Yeah.
in front of, the rodeo. And for us, it was a really, really special moment. And when it ended, we had someone come up and talk to us. And she said, I heard that Nostalgia was, available for adoption. And we are like, yeah, she is. And they were asking some questions. And we were like, yeah, well, she's a horse that, we are really just focusing on Liberty on. Like, she's, as you can see, she just did a performance in front of 1,000 people and did phenomenal. But the person's immediate response was, oh, so she's just a pasture horse. And both Patrick and I were like, are you kidding me?
No.
Yeah, do you see what she just did? She just chose to do,
Yeah.
And for us, I think it was really that moment where we were like, okay, no, like this is not how she should be viewed. And that kind of was what led us to decide we're going to keep her and we're going to have her help promote, not only rescues, but also horses that don't want to be ridden. And that was what led to then kind of the now misfit mares, as I call them, coming together. And we kind of continue to try to promote that. It's about the rescues, it's about connection, it's about non-ridden horses. And we have since combined the teams with my husband's geldings, and we have 3 geldings as well, and they all work together as a team of 6 too.
Nice.
So
Wow.
it's really cool. I will always have that special place in my heart for mayors, and I think that's what it really, really comes down to. And I hope one day more people do too.
Yeah, I agree. They are really incredible to build a relationship with, I feel like.
Yeah.
For me personally, the gelding, I'm like, I mean, you're here, you'll probably always be here, but but my mares, I'm like, oh, I just love them and feel like you have, a personal relationship with them.
Exactly.
But it is different. They are a little more opinionated and a lot of times. But yeah, I love mares. And I also think so good too to keep letting people know, like you can have horses and there's a way to be with them and they don't have to be ridden.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's great for some horses, and it's also incredible to be able to go out and ride horses. But yeah, even a pasture pet, as we say, like just to be able to go out and sit with a horse is really an incredible experience. Talk more about the new organization you started, the Equine Liberty Organization. From what I understood, it's a healthier way to do competition. Is that fair description of it?
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful description. That is absolutely our goal with it. This, as I spoke earlier, it was really a struggle for me growing up, wanting to compete, but not having a way that felt good for me. And good for my horse. We also were going around and we were teaching, liberty to people and liberty to horses. I think people kind of started to feel like, okay, well, like, I did it. I have, the basics, but I don't know where to go from here. And so it's still kind of viewed as, a little warm up, and so through that, we're like, okay, we really want to create a way so that there is some place to go with it. Cause I think it will help both people that don't want to ride. I think it will help horses become more adoptable. I think it will help a lot of things if there are ways to create goals and competition around liberty. And so that's kind of how that was born. It was always Patrick's dream to start a youth organization. So it actually started 3 years ago as the Youth Equine Liberty Organization. And it was, really, really fun. And we were having, youth come and do freestyles and do these different in-person events and virtual events with their horses. And it was so cool to see. But over and over again, we had people asking, it's like, well, I'm an adult, but I really want to compete. Like, can I do it? And we then, the next year added a youth at heart chapter. So that was for people that were older but still wanted to compete. And then we just kept feeling like we were missing this opportunity because there were these people that were not youth that still wanted to be a part of it. And so this year we actually rebranded and launched it as the Equine Liberty Organization. That we have the youth chapter, but it's now, for all ages, and it's a lot clearer to people. And we actually have our first national show that we're hosting this year. So that'll be at the Kentucky
Ah,
Park in October. So we're really excited about that. And that will have liberty classes, bridleless classes. We're also incorporating the disciplines. So we're going to have, bridleless jumping, bridleless dressage, bridleless ranch
cool.
driving. So yeah, it's like kind of trying to show people that, liberty is a foundation and you can use it in all different disciplines, all different ways that you ride, and there's somewhere to go with it. So that's really how that came about. And we do virtual shows all throughout the year. We have academies, which are kind of like these groups of people and barns that are local communities for people to, work with to help them grow their liberty, to help, connect with people that are in their area and build kind of that horse family. And then we do local level in-person shows as well throughout the year. And we're really excited about it and are hoping to continue to grow our efforts there and provide, more events and more education through it as it grows.
Yeah, that's exciting. And I've heard lots of people who would like to go a more natural way in the competitive world, and you're not allowed to in a lot of the different circuits. So that's exciting to have those events of all kinds that you can work towards. Really neat.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what we're hoping for. I mean, I was one of those people. Of course, I'm not going to compete in this, but that frustration that I was felt even now, I've really been diving into dressage and really having a lot of fun with it, but I don't really want to do it with the bridle. I've really enjoyed, doing it bridleless, and there's just no way, for me to go and compete in that way. And I think if, there's more options out there for people, maybe it will eventually one day help these other organizations to look at other options, even if it's just being allowed to ride bitless, right? Even that would be a
Yeah.
big step for a lot of places. For all of our classes, we still have like training divisions where you can ride with your bridle, you can do it with your halter, but your focus is on doing less with that. And so that's what we're hoping for. And everything that we do, we really gear it towards, all our judging and all of our rules and stuff are geared towards putting the horse first and trying to, award the relationship and the connection and the horsemanship before everything else.
Yeah. That's exciting. That'll be exciting to see where that goes and what that builds into. I have a feeling you guys will turn it into something great. So,
Thank you.
what advice, if someone wants to start at Liberty, what are some of the first things they should maybe do or could start doing?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is don't be afraid you're going to mess it up. It's going to be fine. And I think sometimes we look at Liberty as this big fancy thing that people do in performances and that we see in these shows, and we think there's no way I could do that. And I assure you 100% you can do it because Liberty is just connecting with your horse. And most people are already doing that. And so I think the biggest advice that I would give is don't be afraid to just go out and try it. And there are so many online resources, even on YouTube, free resources, right? There's so many different approaches to liberty, which is beautiful and it's wonderful. And there's different ways that you can incorporate what you're already doing and incorporate liberty with it. So my biggest advice would be go out and try it and explore different approaches to it. And when you find someone that's a good fit, getting some in-person help is super helpful, but there's so many ways that you can just get started without even any pressure, just playing with your horse at home in the pasture. It doesn't matter. You don't need a round pen, you don't need a certain tool, you don't need anything. You just need you and your horse in a space and trying to connect.
Yeah, I love that. And that's great advice because so much in the horse world, a lot of times, like, don't do this, don't ever do this, don't ever make this mistake. And a lot of times, I mean, you can make that mistake and it'll still be fine. So
Yep.
I love that idea that, yeah, go out and try new things and connect with your horse, see what works for the two of you. That's great. Thanks so much for being here. Tell everybody if they want to learn more about your organizations, participate in your competitions, or even just connect with you guys, where they can find you, where the best places to do that are.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This has been really great to chat about all these things, and I'm really grateful for all the work that you're doing. I know putting this together is not easy, and
Yeah.
having
It's a
having seen,
process.
yeah, you clearly are really putting in a lot of work to this, which I think a lot of people would really appreciate. I would say, really we're gonna answer in any way that you reach out. Gamilah Unbridled is our most active social media for our nonprofit, and so you can find us on there and see the work that we're doing with the rescues and the team. I personally am Misfit Mayors on Facebook and Instagram, and that's where you can see the three sassy girls the most. And then Equine Liberty Organization, we have on social media, and our website is eloliberty.com. And any of those places that you find, if you shoot us a message, we are going to be happy to direct you to answer questions, to connect in whichever way is most helpful.
Awesome. Well, thank you again so much for being here, for sharing your story and your experience. It is so great, I think, when people can see that you can have a relationship with horses that's different than maybe what we've been told for a long time, or a lot of the mainstream ideas are that you have to have this relationship of control. That was definitely a huge one for me. So I love you guys have gone so far the other way. It's really cool to see, and definitely, like, if anyone's interested, check out your social media and stuff, because you guys have some great stuff on there. But yeah, thank you for being a voice for the horses, really, and, taking in those horses that obviously had a really hard time working within the traditional confines of a lot of horsemanship, and just showing that transformation that can take place. I'm definitely going to be checking out more and going back and looking at some of the stuff that you guys have posted in the past, because I think it's just incredible what you guys are doing. So thanks again.
Thank you so much for your time. And we have definitely gone an extreme in the other direction, and just know that you don't need to be that extreme to get
Yeah.
that connection with your horse. We like to definitely push the boundaries, but it's all, yes, in the name of building that relationship. And there's so many beautiful ways to do that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, you don't have to even be out there riding your horse without a bridle across the country.
No, you do
You don't have to go
not.
that far. But yeah, just the idea that, maybe you go bitless, or maybe you are just softer in your hands.
Yeah.
Like, so many cool things to just open up the possibilities of. So yeah, thank you for sharing that with everybody.
Thank you for joining us and learning about horses that heal and the humans who help them. We hope you'll continue with us on this journey. We'd love for you to subscribe on your favorite platform and follow The Touch of a Mustang on any of the major social media outlets. Please share with your friends, anyone who loves horses, or anyone who might be struggling and could benefit from this message. If you have felt the healing power of horses or help them in their divinely appointed mission, please reach out. We want to hear your story. As we say goodbye, always remember that the horse is always there to help you heal.